In a quaint southern town, a gifted black hair stylist toiled relentlessly, yet her earnings barely covered daily needs. One day, after a compassionate, complimentary haircut for a grizzled veteran, her world crumbled. Her ruthless employer, Pearl Anderson, publicly shamed her, slashed her wages and cast her out, leaving her with nothing but her dignity. Believing she had lost everything, trapped in despair, she was unaware that her simple act of kindness had ignited a wave of support, spreading like wildfire and opening an unforeseen door. Rivertown was the quintessential small southern community, where everyone knew everyone, a place where life moved at a leisurely pace and traditions were deeply rooted. Nestled amidst historic buildings stood Pearl's hair studio, the town's most prominent and renowned salon. It was the preferred destination for the affluent, a hub where gossip flowed as freely as hairspray, and where Jamal O. Brooks, a 32-year-old black hair stylist with the touch of an artist, had tirelessly dedicated years, yearning for the moment she could finally break free. Jamal hadn't always envisioned a future in Rivertown. She harbored grand aspirations, her own salon, a sanctuary where every individual regardless of background felt valued and respected. But dreams couldn't pay the bills and leaving wasn't straightforward. She was bound by a restrictive contract with Pearl Anderson, the salon's owner, a woman whose reputation for cruelty nearly eclipsed her styling prowess. Pearl had offered Jamal a job fresh out of beauty school when she was eager and naive. However, Jamal soon realized Pearl saw her not as an asset, but merely another pair of hands to exploit. Pearl subtly conveyed her belief that a black woman like Jamal had no true future in the industry beyond taking appointments, sweeping floors and knowing her place. Jamal cultivated a devoted clientele, customers drawn to the salon by her exceptional skills, not Pearl's name. Yet, despite generating more business than anyone else, she received lower pay and the least desirable shifts. She had once attempted to secure a loan for her own establishment, but banks were hesitant to fund a black stylist in a town still largely controlled by the old guard. So she stayed, swallowing her pride, stifling her resentment and pushing forward, one haircut at a time. That morning, as Jamal strolled down Main Street towards work, she paused at a small coffee stand, craving caffeine to face another demanding day. That's when she spotted him, Ray Thompson. Ray's name once resonated in Rivertown. A former army sergeant, he had returned from overseas service hailed as a hero, yet treated like a phantom. At 65, he bore the weary countenance of a man who had witnessed too much, lost too much and expected even less. His beard was wild, his clothes disheveled, yet his presence commanded attention. What the townspeople didn't grasp was that Ray was no ordinary down-on-his-luck individual. He was an observer, a writer, a man who embraced life's rough edges to comprehend it more deeply. Jamal had encountered him years prior, shortly after his return. They weren't close friends, but an unspoken understanding existed between them. Two individuals who knew the feeling of being outsiders in a place that never truly embraced them. "Morning, Ray," Jamal greeted, offering a warm, albeit tired, smile. Ray nodded, adjusting the old military cap he always wore. "Morning, Jamal. You look like you could use some coffee." She gestured to the stand. Ray hesitated. "I don't want to be a bother." "Oh, please, I insist," she said, waving him off before ordering a second cup. When the barista handed it over, Ray took a slow sip, savoring the warmth. "Haven't had a good cup of coffee in a while," he admitted. Jamal leaned against the counter, eyeing him. "You ever going to let me clean that mess up?" she teased, pointing to his wild, untamed beard and hair. Ray chuckled, but a distant look clouded his expression. "Ain't much point in it." Jamal frowned. "Come by the shop later. Let me fix you up." He looked at her, truly looked at her, as if attempting to discern the motive behind the offer. He knew Pearl, knew her character. He also knew Jamal wasn't one to let something as trivial as a prejudiced, bitter old woman deter her from doing what was right. "You sure that won't get you into trouble?" he asked cautiously. Jamal hesitated. The truth was, she knew precisely what would transpire if Pearl discovered her actions. She had spent years adhering to Pearl's rules, keeping a low profile, striving not to give the woman further reason to deem her expendable. Offering Ray a free cut, especially when Pearl habitually scorned men like him, was a direct affront to everything Pearl believed. Yet, gazing at Ray, this man who had served his country, who had sacrificed more than most of his judges ever would, Jamal knew there was no choice to be made. If Pearl has a problem with it, she can take it out of my paycheck, Jamal finally stated, firm but calm. Ray exhaled, shaking his head with something akin to amusement. All right then. I'll see you later. Jamal watched him walk away, fully aware that she had just made a decision that would alter everything. The morning at Pearl's hair studio began as usual. Jamal arrived early, unlocking the glass door, inhaling the familiar blend of hairspray and fresh coffee from the small station in the corner. The salon already buzzed with hushed conversations as clients settled into their chairs, perusing magazines, exchanging pleasantries. The familiar rhythm of the salon offered a sense of routine, of normalcy, even as a dull unease weighed heavily in her chest. She hadn't informed anyone about inviting Ray, not out of shame, but because she understood the salon's dynamics. The moment Pearl caught wind of it, there would be severe repercussions. It wasn't merely about money. Pearl's prejudices ran deeper than profit. She cultivated a specific clientele, a certain image she wished her business to project, and in her mind, individuals like Ray, those who didn't conform to her neat, polished world, were not part of it. Jamal worked through the morning, keeping her head down, allowing muscle memory to guide her as she snipped, trimmed, and styled. But every so often her eyes darted towards the door, waiting. And then just past noon he entered. Ray stood in the doorway, surveying the space like a man who knew he didn't belong but had chosen to enter nonetheless. The salon noticeably quieted. A few women in expensive blouses glanced up from their magazines, exchanging subtle, unmistakable looks. Jamal felt it like a shift in the atmosphere. The way people stiffened, the way their polite smiles faltered ever so slightly before resuming their conversations. Ray ignored them. He gave Jamal a slow, deliberate nod and made his way to her chair. She kept her voice light. Ready to let me work my magic? He chuckled as he sat down, shaking his head. Ain't much magic needed for this old head, but do what you got to do. Jamal draped the cape around his shoulders, fastening it at the neck before running her fingers through the tangle of silver-streaked hair. You ever had a proper fade? Can't say I have. Well, today's your lucky day. She began working, the low hum of clippers filling the space, muffling the quiet murmurs from the other stylists and customers. As she worked, she found herself recounting her upbringing in Rivertown, how she'd spent years striving to prove herself in a town that never truly embraced her. Ray listened, nodding occasionally before finally remarking, You know, I spent years thinking a uniform would make me matter. That if I gave enough of myself, this country would always have a place for me. Jamal paused mid-trim, watching him through the mirror. He gave a dry chuckle, shaking his head. Turns out, the second you stop wearing it, the second you stop being useful, people forget. They don't see the man anymore, just the things they assume about him. She swallowed, gripping the clippers a little tighter. They don't get to decide who you are. Ray met her gaze in the mirror. Neither do they for you. Jamal took a breath and continued, letting the work ground her, letting the weight of his words settle somewhere deep inside her. By the time she finished, Ray looked like a different man. The rough, unkempt edges were gone, replaced by sharp, clean lines that softened the years in his face. He ran a hand over his freshly shaved jaw, exhaling slowly. Damn, he muttered, almost forgot what I looked like. Jamal grinned. Told you it was magic. And for a brief moment she forgot about Pearl, forgot about the tension simmering in the shop. All she saw was Ray, a man who had endured hell and back, finally looking like himself again. And then the door swung open and Pearl entered. She said nothing at first, simply stood there, surveying the scene, taking in Ray in her chair, the way Jamal was brushing the last of the loose hairs from his shoulders. She set her bag down, her mouth pressed into a thin, unimpressed line. The room tensed. Even the stylists working on their clients seemed to hesitate, as if awaiting the inevitable. Pearl didn't address Ray, didn't even look at him. Instead she turned her eyes on Jamal and asked, her voice deceptively even, Did he pay? Jamal felt it then, the inevitable rupture, the moment everything would change. She knew instantly that no version of this conversation would end well, but she refused to look away. I told him it was on me, she said, her tone measured, calm. Pearl's expression barely shifted, but her voice carried a sharpness that could cut skin. You told him. Pause. So, we're just handing out charity now? Jamal clenched her jaw, but before she could speak, Ray did. Didn't realize a haircut could be charity, he said, his voice level but firm. Guess I missed the sign out front saying this place don't serve people like me. Pearl's eyes snapped to him then as if she were only just acknowledging his presence. We serve paying customers. Ray's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. That right? He looked around the shop. Funny, I don't remember getting turned away when I used to come here wearing a uniform. Pearl flushed, just barely. Jamal couldn't stay silent any longer. I said I'd cover it. Take it out of my paycheck if you have to. Pearl laughed, then short, bitter. Oh, don't worry, I will. And while I'm at it, I think I'll take a little extra for the trouble. Because you know what happens when a place like this gets too comfortable with certain kinds of people? Customers stop coming. Jamal's pulse spiked. She had known it was coming, but hearing it aloud, hearing the contempt, the venom dripping from every word, ignited something deep, raw, and burning within her. She set her clippers down, slow and deliberate. If you're that worried about your customers, Pearl, she said, her voice even, controlled, then you don't need to worry about me taking up space here anymore. Pearl's eyes narrowed. Excuse me. Jamal took off her apron, folding it neatly, setting it on the counter. I quit. A hush fell over the shop. Pearl stared at her as if she had lost her mind. Oh, don't be ridiculous, she scoffed. You think you'll find another job that pays this well? You think people are going to line up to have their hair cut by? She stopped herself, but Jamal heard the unspoken words. By a black woman who should know better than to step out of line. Ray stood then, slow and steady, meeting Pearl's gaze with the quiet force of a man who had faced far worse than her. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, he said simply. And then with a final glance at Jamal, he turned and walked out. Jamal followed without looking back. The heat outside felt different when Jamal stepped into it, as if the very air had shifted around her, thick with something heavier than just the southern summer. She had quit. The words still echoed in her head, not with regret, but with an almost surreal finality. Years of swallowing her pride, of enduring Pearl's thinly veiled contempt, of knowing she was the best stylist in that damn shop but never being treated as such, all of it had culminated in a single moment. Ray was already a few steps ahead, his pace steady but unhurried, like a man who had seen enough to be unfazed by anything. He didn't turn around until they were halfway down the block. You all right? His voice was calm, unreadable. Jamal let out a slow breath, rolling her shoulders as if shedding the weight of the past few years. Ask me again in an hour. Ray gave a small nod as if he understood more than he let on. He took off his cap, ran a hand over his freshly cut hair and glanced down the street. Come on, you need a drink. Jamal let out a dry chuckle. You buying? Damn right. They ended up at Murphy's, a small bar on the edge of town, the kind of place where people went to disappear for a few hours. The bartender, a man named Vic who had been pouring drinks longer than Jamal had been alive, raised an eyebrow when he saw Ray but asked no questions. Jamal took the first sip of her beer in silence, letting the cool bitterness settle on her tongue. The adrenaline still coursed through her veins, but beneath it was something else, a kind of clarity she hadn't anticipated. I should be panicking, she admitted, setting her bottle down. I just quit my job with nothing lined up, no backup plan, no safety net. She let out a breath, shaking her head. Pearl's been holding that damn contract over me for years, making sure I never had enough to start fresh. Now I've got nothing. Ray took a slow sip of his whiskey, watching her over the rim of his glass. You've got more than you think. Jamal let out a small, humorless laugh. Yeah, like what? Ray leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the bar. You got your reputation. You got a whole town that knows you're the best stylist in that shop, hell, the best in the county. You got people who'd rather sit in your chair than anywhere else. And now, he shrugged, now you got a story. Jamal frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Ray set his glass down, his expression thoughtful. I write for a reason, Jamal. People don't care about what happens behind closed doors, not until someone forces them to look. Pearl, she's been running that place like a plantation, thinking nobody would ever call her out on it. But today you did. And people saw it. They heard it. Jamal's fingers tightened around the neck of her bottle. That's not going to pay my bills. Ray's lips curled slightly. No, but it's going to do something better. She studied him, searching for the catch. And what's that? I'm going to write about it, he said simply. Not just what happened today, but everything. The way she treated you, the way she's been treating you for years. And I'm not the only one talking. Jamal exhaled, suddenly aware of just how many clients had been in that shop when it all went down. Women who came in weekly, women who loved to talk. Word was already spreading. Ray tapped the counter, signaling for another drink. By tomorrow morning, the whole town's going to know exactly what went down. Ann Pearl, he smirked, shaking his head. She's going to wish she never opened her damn mouth. Jamal felt the weight in her chest shift, not disappear but transform into something different. A slow, simmering realization that Pearl's grip on her was finally gone. She didn't have a job, didn't have a plan, but for the first time in years she wasn't afraid. And that felt like power. By morning the town had turned against Pearl. Jamal woke to a buzzing phone, messages piling in from people she hadn't spoken to in years. Clients, friends, even former coworkers. All of them had heard. It had taken only one night, one article. Ray's piece ran in the local paper first thing in the morning, detailing everything. The years of quiet discrimination, the pay disparities, the way Pearl had always found a way to remind Jamal that she was just a worker, never an equal. But it was the ending that hit hardest. Yesterday, Rivertown watched as a black woman with more skill and heart than anyone in that salon was punished for an act of kindness. We watched as a business that has thrived on exclusion made it clear that the only thing it values more than money is control. And now we decide if we let that stand. Jamal scrolled through the comments, her stomach tight. The town was furious. Pearl's hair studio was trending on local social media pages, not in a good way. Clients were canceling appointments, vowing never to step foot in there again. Some were demanding Pearl step down entirely. The women who had been in the salon that day hadn't remained silent. They had spoken to their families, their friends, spreading the story faster than even Ray's article could. And just like that, Pearl's reputation was crumbling. Jamal was still trying to process it all when her phone rang. A number she never expected. The mayor. She stared at the screen for a long second before finally answering. "This is Jamal." Jamal, Mayor Benjamin Wallace's voice was smooth but firm. "I heard about what happened. Read about it too." Jamal didn't respond, she wasn't sure what to say. "I'd like to meet with you today," the mayor continued. "I believe Rivertown owes you a conversation." Conversation that was new. By noon, Jamal found herself in the mayor's office, seated across from Wallace as he folded his hands on the polished desk. The man had been in office for years, a politician through and through, always careful, always measured, but today he seemed genuinely troubled. "I won't dance around the issue," Wallace began. "What happened at Pearl's was unacceptable, and it doesn't reflect the kind of town we claim to be." Jamal arched an eyebrow. "You sure about that? Because it seemed pretty normal to me." Wallace's expression tightened, but he nodded. "That's exactly why I wanted to talk to you." He leaned back in his chair. "I've had quite a few conversations this morning. Business owners, council members, hell, even my wife had some words for me over breakfast." He exhaled sharply. "People are upset, and rightfully so." Jamal waited. She knew where this was going. "The town wants to do something to make this right," Wallace said carefully. "Some have suggested we put together a fund to help you get back on your feet, maybe even open your own salon." Jamal stilled. She had expected the town to react, expected Pearl to take a hit, maybe even shut down, but this, people offering to hand her money? She hadn't seen this coming. She could see it now, the headlines, the pity-filled nods. Rivertown redeems itself by helping the poor black woman it wronged. Her stomach turned. "No." Wallace blinked. "I'm sorry." Jamal lifted her chin. "I don't want charity." The mayor looked genuinely confused. "Jamal, this isn't charity. It's the community trying to do right by you." "You want to do right by me?" She leaned forward, holding his gaze. "Then don't just throw money at the problem so everyone can pat themselves on the back and move on. Fix the real issue. Call Pearl out by name. Acknowledge that what happened wasn't just unacceptable. It was discrimination. Make it clear that Rivertown doesn't stand for that." Wallace hesitated, his jaw tightening. Jamal gave a dry laugh, shaking her head. "Yeah, that's what I thought." Before he could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Ray stepped in. Jamal frowned. She hadn't expected him to be here, but the moment he met her eyes, she knew something was up. Wallace let out a small sigh, rubbing his temple. "Let me guess, you have something to say too?" Ray slid his hands into his pockets. "Sure do." The mayor gestured for him to continue, looking tired already. Ray stepped closer, glancing at Jamal before speaking. You know she doesn't want a handout, but she does need something. Jamal frowned. Ray, he held up a hand, stopping her. I own a building, he said simply. Been sitting on it for a while. Needs some work, but it's got space enough for a shop. He shrugged. Figured it's about time someone used it. Jamal stared. You, what? Ray met her gaze, steady. You want to earn it, right? Then let's make a deal. You run your salon out of there, pay me rent when you get on your feet. No favors, just business. Silence stretched in the room. Jamal wasn't used to people like Ray. People who saw her not as a story, not as something to fix, but as someone worth investing in. She swallowed hard. You serious? Ray's lips quirked. I don't say things I don't mean. Wallace exhaled, running a hand down his face. Well, that certainly changes things. Jamal let out a slow breath, then turned back to the mayor. So here's what's going to happen, she said, voice steady. You're going to make a statement. You're going to say Pearl's name, and you're going to make damn sure every business owner in this town knows that what she did won't fly here. She sat back. And I'll take care of the rest myself. Wallace studied her for a long moment, then finally he nodded. All right, Jamal, he said. You've got yourself a deal. Jamal stood outside the mayor's office, the weight of the conversation still settling in her chest. The sun hung high, beating down on the pavement, but she barely noticed. This was real. The deal had been made, her deal, not charity, not a handout, an opportunity on her terms. And for the first time since walking out of Pearl's salon, she let herself believe it. Ray leaned against the railing beside her, watching the street like a man who had seen 100 different versions of this town. You all right? Jamal let out a slow breath, running a hand through her curls. I think I might be. He nodded, taking a beat before saying, You're going to need help. She smirked. Is that your way of offering? Ray shrugged. Got a few connections. People who owe me favors. I'll see what I can do. He paused, then added, This place of yours, it's got to be more than just a salon. Jamal frowned, glancing over. What do you mean? Ray exhaled, his gaze steady. You're not just opening a business, Jamal. You're setting a standard. You saw what happened back there. This town's been turning a blind eye for years. Now they're watching. So you got to show them what's possible. Jamal held his stare, something unspoken passing between them. He was right. This wasn't just about cutting hair. It was about proving something. By the end of the week, the building was hers. It wasn't much yet, just 4 walls, a cracked mirror, and an old neon sign from whatever business had been there before. But standing in the empty space, Jamal could already see it. She could see the chairs lined up, the hum of clippers, the quiet confidence of clients walking out looking and feeling like their best selves. The work was slow. She refused to take donations, no matter how many people tried to hand her cash with guilty smiles. Instead, she made every dollar count. She saved, she bartered, she pulled favors from suppliers who had known her for years. Ray held up his end of the deal, introducing her to people who could get things done. Painters, electricians, even an old friend who had a knack for refurbishing furniture. The community showed up in ways she hadn't expected. People dropped by offering what they could. A spare chair, a fresh coat of paint, even just a kind word. Not because they pitied her, but because they believed in her. And then one morning it was ready. The Brooks Company hair studio opened with no grand ceremony, no speeches, just an open door and the promise of something different. The first client walked in before the open sign had even settled in the window. Then the next and the next. By noon every chair was full. And Pearl? Her salon never recovered. Her regulars vanished. The staff started quitting one by one until she was left running a business that no longer had the reputation to keep it alive. Within a year she shut it down. No public statement, no announcement, just a quiet, unnoticed ending to something that had once ruled over Rivertown's beauty industry. Jamal never went back. One afternoon, months after her shop had found its rhythm, Ray came by. He leaned in the doorway, watching as Jamal shaped the edges of a young boy's fade, her hands steady, sure. When she finished dusting off the cape, Ray gave her a small nod. Told you, he said. Jamal smirked. Told me what? That you had more than you thought. She looked around the shop, at the clients, at the sign in the window, at the life she had built with her own damn hands, and she knew he was right. The world ain't fair, but sometimes if you stand your ground you can make it a little bit better. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.